So can we have the British national anthem as well? Okay, Madam DG, are we having technical problem?
Just took it over again.
Sorry? So thank you. Let me then give the webinar guidelines. The webinar is being recorded, will be available on our YouTube channels, Nigeria-British Chamber of Commerce channel. To make comments, kindly use the chat icon. Submit your questions via Q&A icon. Only those questions submitted during this session will be answered through this procedure. So it's my pleasure to welcome our President and Chairman of Council, Mrs. Bisi Adeyemi, to take her welcome remarks. Madam President, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Okmoko. Good morning, distinguished patrons, members of Council, members of the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar themed Fiscal Federalism and the VAT Conundrum, organized by the Professional Services Group of the Chamber. For those of you who may not be aware, and I think those will be few, the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce is the foremost bilateral chamber in Nigeria. It was established in 1977 to promote trade and investment between Nigeria and Britain. The NBCC is affiliated with the British Chambers of Commerce, which gives our members beneficial access to a network of 53 chambers across the UK and 71 other international affiliates. The Chamber carries out various activities targeted at the promotion of trade and investment, advocacy, business incubation, training, business networking, and policy formulation. Today's topic is one that we are all familiar with, given the controversy it has thus far generated. Some state governments have proceeded to pass laws imposing VAT on certain goods and services, and inevitably, the matter is now before the courts. Pending final determination, there has been the ongoing debate about the implementation of fiscal federalism in Nigeria, the validity of the VAT Act, and whether or not states should be allowed to levy and collect VAT. Today's webinar is indeed particularly timely and provides a good opportunity to educate ourselves and enlighten our members and the public, whilst attempting to make recommendations on possible solutions to resolve the impasse. Having the caliber of the guest speakers join us today is indeed a great opportunity for learning for all of us, and I'm convinced that we shall find the session very interesting and insightful. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce today's guest speakers. Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, SAN, Senior Partner, Olisa Agbakoba Legal. Dr. Agbakoba is a Senior Partner and Head of the Arbitration and AJR Practice Group at Olisa Agbakoba Legal. He is an alumnus of the University of Nigeria and Nsukka and the London School of Economics. Dr. Agbakoba is one of Nigeria's leading experts in arbitration and has presided over several complex cases. He is the brain behind the first law firm annex arbitration mediation center in Lagos and the OL Arbitration and Mediation Center. Dr. James Kayode Naeju, Managing Consultant and CEO, JK Consulting Co. Limited. A chartered accountant, tax expert, arbitrator, and forensic professional of national and international repute, Dr. Naeju worked for 32 years in the Federal Public Service, where he rose to become the Executive Chairman of the FRS between 1992 and 1999. He was later appointed the Accountant General of the Federation, where he transformed the Treasury and introduced many fiscal reforms. He's a Fellow of the Institute of Management Consultants, a Fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, a Fellow and past President of the Chartered Institute of Taxation Nigeria, a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitration of Nigeria, a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Forensic and Investigative Professionals in Nigeria and New Jersey. He was honored with the National Award of Officer of the Order of the Niger in 2005. Is a Managing Director, Consultant at JK Consulting. Ms. Patricia Williams, Partner, Tax Law, Bowman's Law. Patricia Williams is a partner in the tax practice of Bowman's Law, South Africa, with over 20 years experience. She's a chartered accountant and an attorney. Patricia specializes in tax-related dispute resolution, including indirect tax. Her accounting and other financial qualifications enable her to assist with financial modeling and pricing calculations in complex transactions, financial risk and settlement modeling in disputes and tax due diligence. Mrs. Lolade Oshosami, Partner, Udo Udoma and Bello Osage. Lolade Oshosami is a partner in Udo Udoma's taxation, compliance, mining, and oil and gas teams. She's an expert in legal and regulatory framework for international investments in Nigeria and advises on diverse domestic cross-border commercial transactions across various sectors. Lolade was called to the Nigerian Bar in 1991 and is an alumnus of the University of Jos, University of London, and the Robert Kennedy College, Switzerland. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention, and I now have the pleasure to invite Lolade to begin the session. Thank you very much.
Madam President, for the introduction. It's my pleasure this morning to moderate this discussion session. And if I may please ask our panelists to turn on their cameras as the discussions kick off. This morning, we have just about 35 minutes to discuss a topic that we could discuss for a week. So without further ado, Madam President has set the tone, and I will simply thrust myself into asking questions directly to our panelists. So this morning, I'll be starting with Dr. Naeju. And to add to Dr. Naeju's profile, Dr. Naeju was the FIRS chairman, the executive chairman of the FIRS in the year that the value-added tax decree was passed. And so he was there when it was conceived and when it was birthed. It would interest us to also know that Dr. Naeju actually authored a book on VAT in Nigeria. So this morning, Dr. Naeju, would like to start first of all by asking you to please explain to our audience certain features of the value-added tax. VAT, as we understand it, is a type of consumption tax, but there appears to be a misconstruction of what type of tax VAT is. So for the benefit of those who are not tax experts, could you please explain this morning in a few words what VAT is in contrast with what sales tax is? Thank you.
Thank you, the moderator. I consider it a honor to be around to answer these few questions and throw more light. I think to understand the nature and the processes of VAT, to see the rationale behind why VAT and not sales tax can be explicitly captured by what late Professor Sam Aluko wrote in the preface to my book. In fact, they were part of the people who encouraged me to write the book, including the Secretary of the Commonwealth by that time, Commonwealth Tax Administration. Now, a few people understand the concept of VAT. It's not only the understanding, even the implementation of it. Both of them are as complex and difficult to grasp. As to why Nigeria eventually opted for VAT, which before a decision is taken, the thing will pass through processes and it will pass through policies. Now, I will draw a little bit. I was there when it all started, and I was part of the people who actually conceived it, but Providence threw it on my shoulder to implement it at the end of the day. With Nigeria in 1981 to 1991, every state was carrying out sales tax. We have the legislation of sales tax, and I will explain the difference between the two. But this figure is very, very important. When all the states were administering sales tax, the whole country, for 10 years, the revenue they gathered was 1.2 billion. Now, for 1 year alone, when VAT came on board, it was projected 6 billion, but we eventually garnered in 8.3 billion. That's the first year. The book I was forced to write was that VAT, that is the facts behind a positive tax in Nigeria. That was the title of the book. VAT as opposed to, so when you look at what the whole state together for 10 years could not achieve, VAT was able to achieve it within a year, even about 3 or 4 times of it. So the study group, which I served in 1991, was headed by Professor Edozie. 2 of the Inland Revenue staff were nominated by the present Doyen, that's the Chief Leke, to work in that committee. I returned from Canada, I returned from Japan, and I went to Canada to understudy their tax system. So that was what qualified me to be in that committee. And what we did was that we found out that the failure of sales tax not being very tax yielding was brought onto the table. And that is how it started. When they finished, the committee finished, it passed through a lot of, some people will be asked to look into it. That's how when my friend, the past president of ICANN, Emmanuel Jerry's subcommittee was asked to look into our conclusion of the implementation. They came out with ideas. They came out with modified value added tax. They came up with so many sales tax. And at the end of the day, at the council level, the Federal Executive Council level, a lot, Professor Eluko was the chairman of the National Economic Intelligence by that time, Economic Intelligence. They all settled for VAT, and they said it had to be centrally collected. One thing I want to make the audience to realize, VAT is a consumption tax. VAT belongs to the sub-national, but that it was a statement of fact recognized by them. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an accountant and public finance expert by law. But I think our son will talk about all legal, constitutional something. I don't want to delve into that. But to answer why the VAT and not sales tax, VAT has a lot of advantages over the sales tax. Under sales tax, you only apply a rate of tax to what you sell. In sale, you make. So if you make the sale 10 times, the VAT will keep on, the sales tax rate will still be imposed on it. If I buy a good in Tinumbu and I carry it to Ikeja, then I will pay sales tax on it. When it gets to Ikeja, when another person wants to sell it, it will impose another sales tax on it. So you find out that there will be what we call increases as the sales are going on. So in looking at the technicality of VAT, it tried to eliminate this principle of making a sales, selling it, imposing tax to another person on and on, which we call a cascading effect. That is, it will rise, make prices to gallop and continue to rise. We looked into it. The VAT, which was brought into the global economy of taxation in 1954, that was the German people brought it in. It helps us to eliminate this process of the sales tax. And that was why the sales tax was not growing at that time. So VAT is a tax on consumption, the value you bring into it. So it means if I produce a good and I sell it, the tax, the amount you charge me will become what you call an output when I sell it. But where I buy the raw material, where I buy the material to produce it, I will have a VAT there, which I can deduct from what the VAT which I pay. Now, when I sell the goods, so we call it output and input VAT. So there is a network which you net it out, which means it's only the value I've added to that goods and services that becomes operational. Those are the fundamental things that governs the difference between VAT and sales tax.
Thank you so much.
The difference is that VAT does not allow a cascading effect. This cumulative increases as you are selling and buying. And VAT is something that is complicated, but at least is manageable and is achievable.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nayeju, for that patient. We patiently listened to that detailed explanation and why VAT became the preferred route. I have a question for you, sir. The sharing formula, this is in relation to the sharing formula. And as you know, this sharing formula is one of the contentious issues that has led to what the current dispute that we have between the two tiers of government. Now, the sharing formula for VAT, as set out in Section 40 of the Value Added Tax Act, allocates 15% to the federal government, 50% to state governments, and 35% to local governments. And we know that this is a net amount after administrative fees have been deducted. And of the total amount due to states, 20% is based on derivation, 30% is based on population, and 50% is based on equality. And as we understand it, what that means is that of that total amount that will be shared amongst the states, 20% will be allocated based on, and will be shared based on the state where the highest volume of VAT proceeds have been generated. Also, the same formula will be applied on the basis of population. So for population, 30% would be allocated, and the higher amounts would go to states with the highest population, and then 50% is allocated and distributed on an equal basis. Now, this sharing formula has been perceived by some to be inequitable. The question I have for you, sir, is that what is the intention, what's the policy intention that was behind the sharing formula at the time VAT was conceived? And have we moved from the point we were at that time? And how have we moved from there to here? Please, sir.
Thank you so much for that beautiful question. Now, I can submit to my audience that because of our lack of research and improvement spirit in Nigeria, the VAT that came on board in 1984 suffered a lot of sit down, no improvement on it. In my book, which I wrote, it was meant, even the rate we are, our rate ought to have graduated to 21 now. If the rate had been followed, British started their own with a 4%. Today, Britain is having 20%. It was not in a day that they bumped into that rate. It was a gradual process, so that people will not be able to be yoked with one bob rate. It does 2.5, well, after a lot of controversy. But this formula you mentioned, the policy was there, and we forecast into the future by then. I remember the day when it was hotly discussed in the council. Late Aluko, who was a renowned economist, mentioned that this tax belongs to the states, and therefore federal government has no hand in sharing anything in it other than the cost of collection. That was the submission of the National Intelligence Unit Committee by that time. So the formula that was first of all proposed was 20% to the federal government to cover the cost of sales, and that to cover the cost of sales and 50% was for the states, and 35% was meant for the local government. Now, the formula is long overdue. The formula is long overdue. Is long overdue for revision, but nobody told it. So automatically, it will lead to people who are discontent. The owners of VAT are the states and the local government. They are the states and the local government. So the original policy was that, at the end of the day, when it was discussed, we settled for 15% in the first initial year or 2 to 3 years to cover infrastructure, to provide infrastructure for the tax and awareness. That was originally to make it that after the 50%, the rate will come down to 5% to cover the cost of collection. Now, the remaining rate will be for the federal and for the state and the local government. On the derivation, very good. By the time we were doing it, the states and the local government, it was a block money that was given to them. The amount that is given to states, 50%, the amount that is given to local government, which is about 35% by the end. Now, we are meant to be shared further based on derivation. The true meaning of derivation is that actually what came out of that area. Now, we were using estimates. Population, you cannot say everybody that stays in the state, use the number of the population they are told to say that will be a basis for sharing it. No, one person in the state can produce a consumption and 100 people may not be able to produce a value, a value-added tax value to meet what one person can produce. So using population, using equality, using derivation of 20%, they are just at the planning at the initial stage. Now, because it was done by paperwork by then, now we have gotten technology. We can deploy software to really get actual VAT from every state can be done. But mark you, most of the figures that the states, particularly the two states that have promulgated their law, are doing is not correct. And they can quote me, it's not correct. Why? Because they have not taken away the VAT on import. They have not taken away the VAT that is centrally by big companies that have branches, like banks, like multinational, whereby they file returns. Because VAT has some complication. How do you file the returns of the collection in a month? A company can be based in Lagos or Port Harcourt and have branches in Sokoto, Maiduguri, in the Jos. You have to determine the actual VAT. So those formulas, they are long overdue. They should be sent to revenue mobilization for them to really jettison them. Let the central organization that is collecting, which is Federal Revenue, go and deploy digital solution to get to the actual VAT after they have netted out what belongs to the VAT on import, what goes into the what you call it. I think my friend Oyele call it Hekota effect in his one of the what I have.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I have to cut you short because we have just 5 minutes and we've spent 16 minutes already. So but thank you very much. I think you have touched on the two very important issues, which is helping our audience understand the difference between VAT and sales tax, the policy intention behind introducing VAT to minimize the cascading effect of sales tax. And you've also helped us to understand the genesis of the sharing formula, that the intention really was not for the federal government to remain at collecting 15%. The 15% was supposed to be for a 3-year period to help them recoup the expenditure they had incurred on the infrastructure and administering of VAT, and to reduce that to 5% going after 3 years. So thank you very much, because I believe that these facts would help our audience understand the depth of the ongoing contention. So I'd like to move very quickly now to Dr. Agbakoba-San, who would address the constitutional issues. So Dr. Agbakoba, the ongoing contention is centered around constitutional issues. I would like you to please help us understand what constitutional issues we are dealing with here. And also, there's an ongoing argument that the order of the Court of Appeal stating that parties should maintain status quo ante bellum is effectively an order setting aside the Rivers State VAT law and the Lagos State VAT law. This has further compounded the uncertainty that taxpayers are having to deal with, both at the domestic and international level. Could you please shed some light on the implication of the Court of Appeal's order and how taxpayers should respond? Thank you, Dr. Abba.
Thanks very much. Well, I think part of the problem is the failure to understand the implications of Nigeria's transition from military rule to constitutional rule. A lot of what Dr. Nayeju describes originated from military rule. And then we fail to actually understand when we move to a constitutional process that things might change. So the problem is in the Constitution, and the solution is in the Constitution. And as a simple lawyer, it is not for me to decide what the Supreme Court say, except to throw a bit of light on how things are playing. The first problem is that Nigeria's revenue base has declined substantially, as you know. We're borrowing money heavily. And money is not available at the state, local government, and federal level. So everybody is suddenly saying, where can we get more money? I'm sure that is partly what drove Mr. Wike to say, well, look, that is actually mine. And of course, he got his lawyers to look at it and they say, yeah, you're right, because we can see that that is not the matter that falls under the exclusive list. So I pause here to talk about the Constitution, just the way it's framed. The Constitution is Nigeria's legal marriage certificate. What you can or can't do between the federal and the state government is spelled out in the Constitution, and it is titled Exclusive, Concurrent, and Residual List. So on the exclusive list, you have 68 items of power, and exclusive means only the federal government can touch it. On the 30, the federal government and the state governments can pass laws relating to those items on the 30. So 30, concurrent, 68, exclusive. Added up, 98. Anything not in the Constitution is residual and clearly belongs to the states. Question, where does VAT fall? That is not a question that I intend to answer, because not only subject this, but as a former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, I should not be presuming to answer questions that are pending before the Court of Appeal. All I can say is, whoever is right will win. So whether VAT is a federal subject or a state subject will be determined by the court. No states in Nigeria, none of the 36 states can veer off into the field of the federal government. Neither can the federal government veer off. So the broad argument presented to the Federal High Court in Port Harcourt by the Rivers State government is that on a review of the tax systems in the Constitution, VAT is not exclusive. If that is correct, that would mean that VAT is something that the states can do. So I guess that is what made Mr. Wike and now Lagos to pass the various VAT laws in their respective states. Are they right? Some of people will decide. And you then asked me, of course, it has caused confusion everywhere. I saw that the Minister for Finance wrote, a letter in the newspapers as an editorial, appealing to people, look, we've got a stay of execution in the, status quo antebellum. We've got the Court of Appeal to stay the effect of the Port Harcourt judgment. And pending that, please continue to pay your tax to federal government via FIRS. On the other hand, Mr. Wike says, no. Look, we've passed our law. And as far as we're concerned, there's a judgment. And so there is absolutely confusion. If I was the chairman of MD of Access Bank, I'll be confused. So the way out is for the Supreme Court to urgently decide the question. And I would hope that Mr. Wike's application to the Supreme Court, requesting the Supreme Court to review the decision of the Court of Appeal, whether the Court of Appeal was right, order a status quo. And status quo order here would mean, in effect, a suspension of the judgment of the Rivers High Court. So the way out of all this mess, because it's a mess, the way out of all this mess is for the Supreme Court, and they have the power to do so, to convert the appeal. Because Mr. Wike's appeal is a narrow one. The appeal is questioning whether the Court of Appeal was right, stop the effect of the Rivers judgment. I would, if I were the CJ of Nigeria, convert that into an appeal on the question who is responsible for VAT, because we need to resolve this matter as soon as possible. So in summary, the Constitution governs what a state can do and what the federal government can do on the other hand. Nobody quite knows. You don't know, Lolade, I don't know who is right. We are waiting for the Supreme Court to make a categorical pronouncement about, the way to go. Politically, now I'm taking off my legal hat. Politically, I'm not sure of the wisdom in stating that VAT is necessarily a state matter. I've looked at it carefully. Some states, including Rivers, may make less money from VAT, because if you take away the chunk, import VAT. Really, if I were the federal government, I would welcome Mr. Wike's case, because if you redistribute the money, the federal government is likely to get more than 15%. Getting 15% now, they're likely to get more money. So if I was the Attorney General of the Federation, and I was also the Minister for Finance, I'd be saying, thank you, Mr. Wike. We accept the fact that the states can do that. So just leave us alone. But that concerns us, we will keep the money. And if you look at the total VAT collection, the federal government may stand to get about 30 to 40%. So my recommendation is that a legal solution is not viable. This thing should be resolved politically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Agbakoba. I couldn't agree more with some of the submissions you've made. Definitely, this matter should be resolved. I think it should be resolved politically, and it should be done quickly. Before I come to Patricia, I just want to ask whether you have any advice for taxpayers from a legal perspective. I'm a taxpayer. What should I do? I have operations in Rivers. I have operations in Lagos. I have operations in Kano and Sokoto. Where do I remit my VAT while all this confusion is going on? Any advice for taxpayers?
Is it for me?
Yes, for you.
Oh, I thought
really advice to our audience, who are all taxpayers, including myself.
Well, I would like to invoke the usual line of comment. I plead the Fifth Amendment. Because there's no answer I can give that will satisfy anybody. And therefore, I would advise, in all honesty, I was a taxpayer and I had 200 million naira to pay. I won't pay it. I will hold it back. I will write to FIRS and say, look, I'm confused. I don't know who to pay to. Until the court resolve it, I'm not paying, because I might pay you and it turns out that I should be paying the states. So my advice, do not pay tax. And you have a legitimate reason not to pay, because who to pay is unclear. Who to pay the tax is unclear. And that is a good reason. That's not tax evasion or tax avoidance. I just don't know who to pay to. So please, federal government and state government, resolve the problem. So as a good citizen of Nigeria who wants to pay tax, I will pay. But now my money will be in the bank, pending when I'm advised by my lawyers that I should pay into the state or to the federal. No one should pay tax.
Thank you, Dr. Agbakoba. I think I would qualify that statement to say that advice is only in relation to VAT. Yes. There's no controversy about income taxes. So
no.
To pay all your other taxes. But thank you so very much, Dr. Agbakoba. You have touched on the issues quite well. I think at this point, before I move to Patricia, our last panelist for this morning, I just want to add that in the matter that was brought forward by the Rivers State, they were also contesting the validity of the Tertiary Education Tax and the that levy and so on. I just want to very quickly mention here that it's the federal government is the one that has exclusive legislative power over matters relating to education and any other matters incidental to education. Also, because of the manner in which tertiary education tax is assessed, it is effectively an income tax. So I would advise our audience as taxpayers to please continue to remit their tertiary education taxes to the FIRS. The only tax that is controversial at this moment is VAT. So I'm moving on now, and we have just about 5 or 6 minutes left to our third panelist for the day, Ms. Patricia Williams from Bowman, South Africa. Thank you very much, Patricia, for joining us. You can see that we have quite a big issue here in our jurisdiction to deal with. And we've brought you in as the outsider to help us understand how we're being perceived at the moment from an international perspective. And so I just want to ask, I'd like to ask, first of all, what your experience is in South Africa in relation to VAT. Are there instances of contention? Has there ever been a situation where the government has had to address sharing formula, for instance? And also to ask you that if VAT becomes a state tax in Nigeria, what would be the implication for cross-border transactions? Would that be a major disruptor? And if so, why? Patricia.
Thank you. So from my experience, one of the key issues for multinationals as regards to taxation is certainty. Investors have to be able to plan and invest by factoring in the relevant taxes that they're going to have within a jurisdiction. And so changes that haven't been anticipated are potentially quite damaging. And then a perceived internal dispute where you start having different levels of government fighting about the ability to impose taxes can also create more uncertainty, which can be bad for investment. The investors generally want to look at the total cost of a transaction. So they'll look at whatever taxes they're going to pay, whether they're VAT or other taxes, they're going to factor them in, and they're going to want to, where necessary, include things like tax gross-up clauses to cover the VAT that they need to have. But of course, a big issue with VAT is potential double taxation. And countries throughout the world have got these double taxation agreements where they have special agreements to try and prevent tax. But of course, these don't cover VAT. And so, I mean, just looking at the Nigerian-South African DTA, for example, it doesn't cover VAT. And so what if you start having VAT being imposed in more than one jurisdiction? Now you have an extra layer of tax, potentially. And if you're going to start having tax at different levels, both federal and state levels, you may well have further instances of potential double taxation. So those are the main concerns. One wants to try and ensure that your VAT only imposes on your own citizens, so to speak. We understand, of course, so South Africa also is a country trying to recover taxes. We also have VAT. We've got a big trend towards taxation on the digital economy because there's a lot of frustration with multinationals generating revenues from within the country and not paying adequate taxes. So we're all facing those kinds of things. But I think all of us as business people will really ask that the government applies an attitude of certainty, try and resolve it as quickly as possible. Try ideally to resolve these issues internally before they become a matter before the courts as they are now.
Thanks very much indeed, Patricia, for that very succinct, succinctly put response. Indeed, this stands to hamper investment flows, and I think it's necessary that government takes into consideration that even in the short time that this controversy has been going on, there's certain people who have stalled their decisions to invest just because of the amount of certainty that this has generated. So I believe that the government is aware of the potential damage that this could cause to an economy that is already very fragile, and hopefully will have a resolution before the end of October, hopefully. And so with that, I'd like to thank our panelists. Now we'll go very quickly to questions from the floor. And I can see that we have 4 questions already, and I'm sure that once we jump into this, perhaps more questions would come, would be put forward. So the first question is from Chijoke Oti, and he's asking, he says, certain VAT is not recoverable. Example is VAT on purchase of fixed assets. Doesn't that make that part of VAT a sales tax? Dr. Nayeju, could you please address this question, sir? I would repeat the question. Chijoke is asking whether the fact that VAT on purchase of fixed assets is not recoverable, whether that then makes VAT a sales tax. I have another one for you here. Dr. Nayeju, are you with us? Dr. Nayeju? You're muted, sir. Okay, I will go on, and while we're waiting for Dr. Nayeju, I'll ask Dr. Agbako. Is Dr. Nayeju with us?
Excuse himself now. He will come in shortly.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Agbako, this is for you. If the Supreme Court judgment favor the state to collect VAT, does that mean FIRS will stop the collection or still collect on behalf of the state? If the state collects the VAT, will federal government still have the cost of collection of 15%?
I don't know if the Supreme Court says that the FIRS is not the appropriate legal authority. VAT, then the entire VAT process is dismantled. It means that the FIRS can do other things, but certainly not collect VAT. So it's so clear. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of the federal government, then the state government cannot collect VAT at all. If it's the other way around, then the federal government cannot collect VAT at all. But remember that the FIRS has other jobs anyway. They do capital gains and corporate and all that. So it's not as if the FIRS will go, but to the extent of the Supreme Court ruling one way or the other, then the VAT will be collected by the authority that is prescribed constitutionally by the Supreme Court.
Thank you very much, Dr. Agbakoba. And to add to that, just to add to that, we know that the Constitution gives the federal government the power to delegate collection in the context of administration,
Yes.
not ownership. So just for administrative purposes,
Yes.
delegation collection may be delegated. Thank you so much. Dr. Nayeju is back. Dr. Nayeju, we have questions here for you. Someone has about recovery. Dr. Nayeju, are you with us, sir? Can I go ahead? I think you're muted.
Go ahead.
There's a question for you that says certain VAT is not recoverable. Certain input VAT is not recoverable. For example, VAT
Not recoverable.
does that not make that part of VAT sales tax? Someone is asking a question in relation to where you can't recover input VAT. Does that not effectively make the VAT a sales tax?
Okay, you want me to answer it straight away? Do you want me to answer it now?
Yes, please answer.
Okay, that is not feasible practically. It's actually a signal for audit, tax audit. It means because if you have a VAT output VAT, then your input VAT should be lower than it. So where are you going to have a not recoverable? It means you have not properly disclosed all the remittances for the output VAT. That is the answer.
I think the question asking it in the context of transactions where you have actually incurred input VAT, and yes, you have also collected output VAT. But in computing the VAT that you need to remit, the nature of the input VAT that you have incurred is such that the VAT Act does not allow you to recover. You know, the VAT Act says that such input VAT should be recovered under your profit and loss account. So I think this person is trying to ask that where you have a situation where most of the input VAT items is non-allowable, does that not then effectively make the VAT a type of sales tax?
No,
So I don't know if you want to answer it again.
That's what I am saying. You see, in terms of taxation, you cannot come and be offsetting your VAT against your profit, your income tax. It's not done. It's not allowed. That's why I said that where we have such a phenomenon, it calls for a tax audit. But that does not make it a sales tax. It's in a sales tax, like I've explained that it is to prevent the effect of holding people and increasing sales tax on the same product, which is possible. People who have practiced it, you know, when we want to compare globally, you look at sales tax itself, it's good for a country that has no state transaction. In Nigeria, the economy is one. The economy is one. If a good now is produced in Lagos, the destination of the consumption can be in Kano, it can be in Maiduguri. In this one, anybody who wants to listen or take this argument, VAT is controversial, which I know, which we have always been saying. That is the reason why it calls for education, talking about it, explaining it. But to say that because of you have not been able to recover your input back, it constitutes a sales tax. The answer is no.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I have another question for you here. Dr. Ayeju averred that VAT is a consumption tax and VAT belongs to the subnationals, that's state and local government. Given the fact of this, does this therefore mean that the implementation was wrong ab initio to have transferred the collection of VAT to the FIRS? And considering the sophistication of IGR in the states, why do you think FIRS and FG, the federal government, are scared of correcting the initial error?
Okay, that's a very good question too. Now, we have experimented the wisdom of a central collection of VAT. These are each subnational of a country collecting it. You can look at other models. Canada is one example. Because of the high-tech level of Canada, what is agitating the mind of the subnational in Nigeria is the arbitrary way of distributing or inputting. I personally, as a designer of VAT, will not agree that you are using population to determine derivation. You are using equality to determine derivation. Those are the things that need to be addressed. It is not who collects it. If we allow all the 36 or 37 tax authority to be imposing and collecting their own VAT, there will be chaos in the economy. That one is true. But in terms of the formula, in terms of the administration, FIRS should be able to, the authority should be able to make sure that every 2 or 3 years, they improve on the methodology, on the processes of doing it. That is the problem, as I see it.
Thank you very much. This is for Dr. Agbakoba. Someone is asking, what will be the constitutional basis on which the federal government will collect VAT on all imports?
There isn't any constitutional basis except the Supreme Court decides that the federal government is responsible for collecting tax, VAT, under the exclusive list. And then look at the cake around which VAT is tied, and there are several components. And one of the components is imports, things coming from abroad. So I would have to remit VAT collections from my clients. So problem now is to categorize what type of tax collection under the VAT scheme belongs to one state or the federal government. But my view is that that is not possible. The Supreme Court will decide it as a whole. And the question that the Supreme Court will look at is, who has the constitutional right or responsibility to collect VAT? Of course, another war may open, which is exactly what is VAT. And all the points that Dr. Naeju was narrating, because I see another war: consumption, sales, VAT, all of that.
Thank you, Dr. Agbakoba. Yeah, I'll also just like to add to that, just like Dr. Agbakoba said, and this has happened before in the case of Attorney General of Ogun State and Aberu Agba. We had a similar situation in relation to sales tax at that time, where you had a federal sales tax act, and then you had the states who had sales tax law. And in that case, taxpayers, a group of taxpayers, Association of Beer Sellers in Ogun State, the Ogun State sales tax law had said they should pay, they should remit sales tax on interstate transactions. And so in that case, the Supreme Court decided that based on item 61, 62 of the exclusive legislative list of the Constitution, that the federal government is the one that has jurisdiction over cross-border, that's international trade and interstate trade. And whereas states have jurisdiction over intra-state commercial activities. So on that basis, in the ruling of the Supreme Court in that case was that to the extent that the Ogun State sales tax law covered transactions that were interstate, it was null and void, because that was for the reserve of the federal government. So I guess when you put VAT beside that, there's that possibility that the federal government, based again on that legislative power, would have oversight and would have a valid claim on VAT in relation to imports, because it's cross-border. Another question, and either Dr. Agbakoba or Dr. Naeju can answer this. So a taxpayer is asking, if we hold back from paying VAT until the courts have decided where we should pay, do we not expose ourselves to interest and penalty?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because you need to be clear who to pay tax to. And if it's not clear to you, through no fault of yours, because River State and the federal government are in a war as to who should collect, then how do you pay? Well, the other thing you can do is you can do what we call interpleader. Go to court and interplead and say, look, my lord, I have 200 million here. I don't know who to pay to. But here's the 200 million. Now, when you decide who should take it, then please pay them. So there are all kinds of things to do. But I would be very slow if I had to advise someone to pay money either way. Because what if the Supreme Court says it is the federal government and you pay to the River State government? So I would urge that men of commerce will exercise caution and go to their lawyers for advice. But we don't give advice on Zoom.
Thank you, Dr. Agbakoba. I stand strongly behind you on that.
No free advice. That man is looking for free advice.
Yes, seek advice from experts, from advisors. Dr. Naeju, do you want to share your perspective, sir?
Yes, let me share my perspective. Now, my answer is we should wait for the Supreme Court to give a decision. But even with the Supreme Court decision, I think the matter, VAT has 3 levels: the constitutional, one, the economic and the social. There will be, if I think it can be addressed that the making of a law on VAT should be by National Assembly. But my personal recommendation as an expert in taxation, not the law, but the administration of it will be centralized. If we have duplications of multiple authority collecting it, there we will be back to the 80s chaos.
Right.
The chaos was much, and it will continue. I rest my case.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nayeju. Without a doubt, there are dire administrative considerations to be made here. I mean, even currently, the PAYE that is also being jointly administered by state governments and federal government, simple things as when a taxpayer, for instance, mistakenly remits the income tax of an employee in a different state, it takes months, if you're lucky, to get the internal board of revenue of that state to reconcile accounts with the internal board of revenue of the other state. So definitely the administrator of VAT, either in whatever direction the courts may rule, is something that we need to look at critically. I have another question from the floor. What is the implication of states levying consumption tax and VAT? Dr. Nayeju, do you want to address that?
Yes, let me address that. That is one of the things that our tax administration, you see, one of the tax policy of the country, which has been adopted, it is said that the consumption tax will supplant all other taxes. Luckily, VAT has achieved it. When we started the collection from 8.3 billion, now last year, 2020, it was 1.53 trillion. Now it has surpassed even higher than the petroleum profit tax. If we are able to streamline the tax one, to reduce it to a minimum one, the same tax for everybody is not the best. In fact, if a law is made, that law will prohibit all those things. That's my own advocate. Now, if it's prohibited, my advice on taxation to all the subnational, we have not done anything with our personal income tax at all. America, advanced world, South Africa, look at what they contribute for the personal income tax. This is the tax that can yield a bulk of something, but because of the poor administration, weak one, all the things is not moving. I think those are the areas we should be able to address if we want to garnish more revenue into the tax net of the subnational.
Thank you very much. The questions are pouring in. Dr. Agbakova, this is for you. This person says, you're proposing a political solution to this problem that is already pending before the court. Can it be withdrawn and resolved amicably? And can that resolution be binding? I'm not a lawyer. That's what the person says.
Well, look, see, I'm looking at this carefully. And even from what Dr. Nayeju has just said, it's clear that in order to avoid multiplicity of taxes and the administration of taxes across 36 states, the gold standard is to have a national scheme of collecting VAT. So long as there's a way that it is shared equitably, I think the problem is we need to see how it is shared equitably. Why should the FIRS take 5%, for instance? Why? What are they doing with it? 5% of as a service charge. And there is something also known, in Nigeria, we are very combative. You see our politicians, everybody is fighting. If this party is leading, people jump from here to there, no ideology. But I've always advocated in the last 20 years something called cooperative federalism. So even though I have discussed exclusive legislative list where only the federal government intervenes and the concurrent, in a lot of federal countries, there is shared federalism. So there are areas where it is clear that the federal and the state need to work together. And I think taxation is one such process, which is why I rather would go for that sort of solution. And we now have constitutional review and amendments in the National Assembly. So if we had people who understood that it's in the national interest to have a central mechanism for collecting taxes, but with equitable remission to the states, then I would be putting forward a bill to amend the tax base, make sure that everybody, all the 6 states are happy and the federal government is happy. That I can tell you, the Supreme Court decision will not resolve the problem because new problems will come. Once the federal and the state go into this war of revenue collection, then the next one will be education tax and then NMPC, and it will be on and on and on. So a diplomatic resolution is, for me, a far better option.
Thank you very much. I have a question here from a professor who is asking, what is the implication for taxpayers in Lagos State? Dr. Nayeju, I want you to please address this. And I would also ask if Dr. Agbakoba has a perspective to share. What is the implication for taxpayers in Lagos State, where we have consumption tax and we also have a state VAT law? Would that not amount to double taxation?
That's the problem.
Yeah, the answer is straightforward. There is chaos. There's going to be chaos. How can the same taxpayer, and that we have not seen enough. If they allow it, we will be having more of it will be going on. It's not advisable. That's what I will say.
Perhaps I should also thank you, sir. Dr. Agbakoba, I heard you alluding to what Dr. Nayeju agreeing with his views. Do you want to add anything to that? I was going to ask Patricia to comment as the outsider here, totally unbiased.
Maybe she should, actually.
Yeah. Patricia, can we hear your views on this debate?
And so this debate is around having a central system as opposed to a more fractured system. I did put in a comment into the feed on this, but yes, I totally agree that a national system is the gold standard, you know, in that you have a consistent standard and you don't have a fractured approach. Double taxation that's been discussed now is a real problem, and that's what literally hundreds of double tax agreements are designed to avoid. But because they're generally limited to income taxes, capital gains tax, your education tax, for example, those kinds of taxes, they don't tend to extend to VAT. And then we have these problems and we need to deal with them. That is a significant amount. If you think about the percentage of VAT compared to the percentage of profit in many transnational contracts, it could completely erode your profit margin and make international trade unfeasible.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. There's still so many questions pouring in, but we won't be able to take all the questions. We have just 1 minute exactly to wrap up the Q&A session. I would like to really thank our panelists. I think they have done justice to all the questions asked. And for some of the questions, I'm sure that you've been able to extrapolate from the comments that have been made on the floor, and you probably already have answers to many of these questions. But the chambers would also reach out to you on issues that you think were not addressed during this panel discussion. So I'd just like to end by saying that we've all seen this morning that when a tax is being introduced into a tax system, there are 3 factors, critical factors that must be considered. And one is the design of the tax, which is what Dr. Nayeju has very nicely taken us through. Another one is the implementation of the tax. Tax cannot be administered outside of the confines of the law, what the law permits, no matter how noble, no matter how excellent the idea may be in terms of policy, it must fall within the ambit of the law. And Dr. Agbakoba has helped us to see that there are gaps in our constitution that definitely needs to be addressed. And finally, also is the issue of compliance. Taxpayers at this time are thoroughly confused. For smart taxpayers, if I were you, that free advice that you're seeking, you already have some direction from the discussions this morning. But please, this is a matter that warrants for taxpayers to actually seek professional opinion. And so we want to thank you, the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce, for this opportunity for the Professional Services Group to host this webinar. And I'd like to hand over at this time to Mr. Seyi Adeyemi, the Vice President of the NBCC. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Lolade. I must say that this has been quite an insightful discussion. And on behalf of the Chamber, I'd like to thank our speakers, beginning with Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, Senior Partner, Olisa Agbakoba Legal, Dr. J.K. Naeju, Managing Consultant, JK Consulting, and of course, Patricia Williams, Partner Tax, Bowman's Law in Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your presentations. And of course, we would like to appreciate our moderator, Mrs. Lode Shosami, a partner of Udo Doma and Beli Osage, for an excellent moderation. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful. We also like to appreciate our patrons and council members who are already, with us, as well as our sponsors for this event. Thank you so much for your generosity. We would like to appreciate our professional service group that has put together this excellent discussion. It's been a highly successful program. And of course, the NBCC headquarters for this educative webinar. Thank everyone for your contribution. Very quickly, I'd like to share with you a few upcoming events. First, later this evening, we will be having our members' evening, an induction ceremony, which we're going to be holding at 5 p.m. at the NBCC headquarters. Also, on Thursday, October 7, we will be having a webinar on the Petroleum Industry Act. It's going to be organized by the Energy Group of the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce. And on the 13th and 14th of October, we're going to be having a training program. It's actually a digital marketing masterclass. It's going to also hold at the NBCC headquarters. And lastly, in the month of October, on the 21st of October at 12 p.m., we will be meeting the governor of Ondo State. It's going to be an investment and business opportunity at that session. So if you're interested in becoming a member of NBCC, you will be most welcome. Please visit our website, www.nbcc.org.ng, and this will be a good experience. Finally, please follow us on our social media so that you can get adequate information on our various activities as a chamber. Once again, I say a big thank you to all participants that have joined us in this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at other webinar programs. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. I'd like to hand over to the Secretariat.